Kevin O'Leary was on the Diary of a CEO podcast, and he talked about his relationship with Steve Jobs. He talked about the amazing success that Steve had when he was alive and what he believed was the reason for that success. The reason was that Steve was exceptionally good at understanding what were signals in his life versus what was noise in his life. He operated 80% of the time in signals. I know that a lot of people talk about this in terms of time management, but I want to highlight how this is so pertinent for personal finance and getting your money life in order. So what exactly does signal versus noise mean? Like, what are they actually talking about? You will create priorities in your life, and these become the signals. Everything else is noise. Everything else is distraction. Noise is equal to distraction. It is the things that takes you off course. Signal is the course. This is the thing you're following. This is the guidance. This is the priorities that you have set. So when Kevin O'Leary is talking about this with Steve Jobs, he's essentially saying like, hey, this guy was able to decide, what were the signals in Apple, and then how could he follow those with such direct focus that 80% of the time he was perpetually engaged in accomplishing his priorities. Every day, Steve knew what were his top 3 tasks that need to be done, and then he ensured that those tasks were done. Anything else, whether it was chatting at the water cooler, having dinner with his family, it was all noise to him. His priority and his focus was technology, development of Apple, and innovation. If it didn't fall into that realm, then Steve Jobs just really wasn't interested. And because of that, he was able to have a tremendous amount of success. We can learn from this from a financial perspective. And so I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like, and I'll give you some examples in just a moment. But please, if you have not already, subscribe to this channel. I am in the process of growing it, and I'm hoping to deliver a lot more very succinct, to the point content for you in the future. So if you like this, please give it a like. And absolutely subscribe. So let's talk about specifically signals and noise in our finances. What does that really look like? First and foremost, just like in time management, just like with Steve, your signals will include those things which are your top priorities. But how do you choose what your top priorities are? That's the tricky part. That's the snag for a lot of folks. And there's really 2 ways that I think that you can do this. The first is understanding what are your values, and I do have a free values exercise that you can find in the description box below. That values exercise will help you isolate what are the things that are most important to you in terms of your health, your fitness, adventure, education. There's a whole slew of them. And you want to make sure that the most important of those are always reflected in your budget. Without reflecting those in your budget and treating those as signals, you are essentially doing yourself a disservice, and you're asking yourself to live without the things that are the most meaningful to you. The second thing that you have to have is a vision for the future. And I talk about this in a prior video about financial faith over financial fear. The idea here is that you have a vision for the future that you're steadily working toward. So for example, your vision for the future might include a paid off house, paid off cars, debt freedom. It might include having $1 million net worth. It might include cash flowing future vacations. Anything that's in your vision for the future that has a financial impact, that is a priority thing that you are working on within the next 1 to 3 years, that also needs to be prioritized as a signal in your budget. When you are doing your signals and when you are building your budget, there are certain things that really just need to happen first, and there are ways to trigger yourself to make those decisions. But before I dig into that, I want to explain quickly what noise is. Noise is essentially all of the comfort things that you do. Noise will look different for every single person, but I will tell you that, for example, when my signal was paying off debt, the things that were the noise that would often distract me were popping into TJ Maxx, shopping the end caps at Target. It was any semi-annual sale. It didn't matter if I had all of the clothes that I could possibly need. When Dillard's had their semi-annual sale, I would find myself rummaging those racks and just seeing what there was to see. Oftentimes it is going and getting those comfort things like eating out or grabbing a latte or getting a DoorDash because you want the convenience of your food being brought to you instead of you going to get it. These are the things that become financial noise in your budget. It is only easy for you to remove those things and to become hyper aware of them when you're also hyper aware of your values and the vision and the goals that you're looking to accomplish. So you have to figure out what are the financial signals that you're working toward in order to identify the noise. That's the big trick for everything that Steve Jobs did, is he knew very clearly, these are my signals. This is the most priority thing that I am working on right now. And because of that, everything else is noise. If you don't have signals, you can't have noise. It's like that old saying, if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority. So let's say you've got your signals figured out. How do you ensure that they become the most important thing? And I've got a couple of recommendations on that. The first is in my book. Let me grab it. All right, guys, for those of you who don't know, now you know, I wrote this book. Okay, so I call this book out because I have a chapter in here called Act Broke to Grow Rich. I will say that the way that I think about money today has evolved. This book doesn't talk about vision setting, and it doesn't talk about knowing your values, because these are things that I have learned and evolved in the 4 or 5 years since I've written this book. That being said, it does have some really good information on how to prioritize. I think what very much so happens for many of us is that we get paid, we cover our necessities, we cover our bills, and then we spend. Necessities might include things like your food and groceries. It might include some things that you have coming up, maybe some medical stuff. And then you have your bills, which would be like your house payment, your rent, your insurance, things like that. And then after that, you'll spend money. If there's anything left over, you will save. And what ultimately this book is recommending is that you make savings your top priorities. At every payday, you structure that you would cover your savings first. Then you would hit your major goals. Then you would cover necessities. Then you would cover bills. If there's any money left over for spending, then you spend. Ultimately, what I'm getting at is that you build a payday routine that puts your signals first. Spending cash equals noise in your finances. I'm also a firm believer in automating as much as possible. If you automate your signals, if you automate that extra debt payment, if you automate that extra mortgage payment, if you automate those transfers to savings or the transfers to your investments, if you automate your contribution increases to your 401k every time you get a raise, you are essentially ensuring that you can't screw up your signals. You've made your signals automatic. Outside of finances, I don't know anywhere that you can automate your signals. So this is absolutely an amazing tool to use, but you first and foremost have to know what are your values and what are your goals? What's the vision you're trying to create? What is the future you are walking toward? It's actually really simple. I think you can summarize it by saying, put the first things first, and then play with what's left.